recovery can be daunting. The 2 weeks in the hospital had been very tough on Izuku. The pain medication took care of the near-chronic pain Izuku normally was in, and without the ache days blurred together and it was harder for Izuku to focus on things, that on top of a lack of sleep waited on him. Izuku always had difficulty sleeping in new places, so the odd sounds, smells, and regular checkups from the staff made it much harder. There were moments of clarity where he enjoyed the company and visits from his mom, Auntie Mitsuchan and Uncle Masan, but Izuku was practically jumping in his seat when they finally let him be released from the hospital, even if he was restricted to a wheelchair. During his stay, Inko had started and finished his transfer from Aldera to the online schooling platform they had settled on. It was one of the nicer ones with courses from kindergarten to a college level. Neither of the Midoriyas knew there were so many options for online schooling, but they would happily take full advantage of it. Izuku would be able to start working right away once he settled at home and started his new schedule. Inko had made sure to instill how important following his recovery plan was to him and told him that both she and Uncle Masan would be making sure he followed it. Izuku found all the attention overwhelming once he was home. His mother helped him through the mornings, taking pills, getting dressed, etc., until Uncle Masan came over to watch him while she was at work. Izuku had tried to protest that part given Uncle Masan was working full-time as a designer, but Uncle Masan assured them all that he could easily work from home for the 6 months needed for Izuku to recover. Izuku was also drowning in his free time because of his restrictions. He couldn't do most physical activities and was limited to only 3 hours of electronic time outside of his homework. He had tried to fill the time with his hero analysis, but there was only so much he could do without the ability to look up fights or information. So he was rather overjoyed when Auntie Mitsuchan brought him more puzzles, board games, hero-themed and otherwise, and a radio to listen to. Izuku greatly enjoyed playing with Uncle Masan and even learned more about the Bakugo's business from Uncle Masan working around him. Izuku also asked about his side of the business since it was probably a lot like support work making costumes. Auntie Mitsuchan had tried to explain it, but that was mostly Uncle Masan's wheelhouse. The first month flew by faster than Izuku would have thought, but it still dragged in places, and he was excited to start the physical therapy part of his recovery plan. They had arranged for Izuku to do the sessions at the hospital his mom worked, so he and Uncle Masan could sometimes see her on her breaks. The physical therapist was nice and Izuku liked talking to him and seeing him 3 times a week. Izuku had been lonely since he left Aldera despite how much Uncle Masan, Auntie Mitsuchan, and his mom tried. Auntie Mitsukan's radio had helped, particularly when the house was just too quiet. Izuku slowly grew to love his new schedule once he was allowed to start walking on his own for short distances at home and was given a bit more freedom to do things. By the 3rd month, Izuku had been able to stop using the wheelchair as he regained full autonomy and was able to start walking around the apartment without aid, but he still stuck to a strict schedule as it was good for him and he was still recovering from his TBI after all. He didn't go out much even though he was allowed to if he went with someone. He simply was too interested in his schooling now that he had a safe, unbiased classroom to learn in. So with the electronics ban out of the way, he basically threw himself into his schoolwork and hero analysis with what he could scrounge up online, since neither the Bakugos nor his mom trusted him to not get hurt from watching hero fights in person. The TBI's damage had been a lot more serious than Izuku had originally thought, and the recovery process was grueling, but he did enjoy the part where he could start journaling and continue his hero analysis notebooks. While Izuku was still recovering from it, he was surprised by how easy some things were becoming, like breathing. It felt so much easier now to just suck in oxygen, something Izuku genuinely hadn't believed he was struggling with until he started his medication and was frequently left amazed how light his chest became with every breath. And once he started walking around the house again, he noticed for the first time in years that he wasn't in pain from doing anything other than that one time he stubbed his toe. Izuku also found he could focus on things without obsessing over it for the next 3 hours to make absolutely sure he fully understood what he was learning, doing. So, he had found life had been so much easier now since his mom found out about the bullying. He was very nervous at first about what was going to happen with Kachan and made sure his mom, Auntie Mitsuchan, and Uncle Masan swear multiple times that they wouldn't punish Kachan harshly for bullying him. Despite not seeing Kachan since the day his mom took him to the hospital, he had been kept up to date on his life through his Auntie Mitsuchan and Uncle Masan. He didn't probe too much though, given the unease both had, especially Auntie Mitsuchan. As they had hoped and with a clean bill of health from a doctor, Izuku had fully recovered with only some scars to show for it. By then Izuku had long since settled into his new life, which made him feel incredible, especially since he could return to regular human levels of activity. Though he was a bit sad he couldn't have daily visits with Uncle Masan. He was also glad his uncle could get back to work and did still feel guilty about taking up so much of his time when he could have been helping Kachan. Currently, however, the Greenettes were both at with Inko working on dinner in the kitchen as Izuku was doing his online coursework in his room while listening to the radio. Izuku had loved his new coursework. The site allowed Izuku to work on as much as he wanted to in one sitting. The coursework also left multiple links to the sources the site had so Izuku could freely dive deep on information binges when something interesting caught his eye. There was an option to text or video call one of the teachers if he wanted someone to help him through it. He didn't want someone to, but having the option was still nice. Izuku was happily typing up an essay for a test that he strongly suspected was a re-review of all his classes as there were questions from all the classes. Izuku had done such tests back in school and had done a few more since he started online school, but he chalked that up to being a part of the online format. The review was quite easy since it was just a once-over of subjects he had covered previously in the curriculum was a decent handful of new ones and some that went deeper on some topics that Izuku knew well from the previously mentioned info binges. Izuku finished the test in about an hour and expected the next assignment to pop up per usual only for a congratulations message to come up instead and baffled he read it hoping to get some clarification from it. When he realized what exactly it was congratulating him for, he made a choked squeak. His noise of distress had been loud enough for his mother to hear. Izuku? Inko called from the kitchen worried over the odd noise. Izuku would have answered but he was too caught up rereading the message because he couldn't be reading it right. Worried he had done something wrong Izuku took his laptop, a gift from the Bakugos, and walked into the kitchen. Mom. CC could you check my work? I think I messed something up. He asked anxiety rearing its ugly head making him tremble slightly. Inko sighed relieved by the question, and happily took the laptop then sat down at the table. It wasn't uncommon for Izuku to have her double-check his work though it rarely needed any correction with how smart her boy was. Still, even she was surprised by the message since it was congratulating her son on graduating middle school. She blinked confused and brought up the index page for Izuku's program and upon reviewing the assignment list she saw Izuku had indeed finished all the middle school work. Inko felt a small bloom of pride well up in her chest as she absorbed the information that her son had completed middle school in just 6 months. Oh Izuku. Inko said pride overwhelming her and causing tears to fall from her face. Mom. Izuku exclaimed panicking then Inko hugged him tightly. Oh Izuku. You're my little genius. She praised overjoyed and so proud of her son then turned back to the laptop. What? Izuku questioned, bewildered by her reaction. You finished middle school already. I'm so proud of you Izuku. Inko cheerfully responded as she clicked the confirm option about the offered graduation certificate. Oh, I'm going to make a cake roll. Inko announced immediately getting up to gather everything she needed while Izuku balked, absolutely shocked he had actually graduated. Inko set the oven to preheat and got started on baking the dessert with excited and puzzled muttering floating between the two as they were both in their own worlds until dinner was finished. They sat together in the living room and began to discuss what to do next. Izuku had to have been held back by his teachers given how fast he breezed through his curriculum and Inko suggested they take the site's aptitude test to properly judge where Izuku's level was which Izuku had agreed to, finding the beginning of the test rather easy. He had expected as such seeing as the site started on the kindergarten level but all in all, it took Izuku around an hour and a half to complete the test then he submitted it. With nothing else to do they both sat back waiting for the result. Izuku felt especially stressed and unintentionally took to picking at his fingernails. It was a nasty habit that he strongly disliked about himself that had originally developed so he could focus on anything when the pain was too much, or it was a really, really bad day that left him stumbling through a heavy mental fog. His habit often left his fingers bleeding, but he hasn't had to do it as often since he just didn't need to anymore. But it reared its ugly head whenever he was anxious, so his fingers have been able to heal without the consistent abuse even if he did relapse. Izuku wasn't left to his thoughts for long as a soft ding came from the laptop. Inko took hold of it and upon seeing the results of his test gasped, what? What's wrong? Izuku asked, suddenly consumed with the idea that he was actually behind on his education and that passing middle school was just a fluke. Of course, he couldn't be that smart. Stupid shitty Deku. It was all just a stupid mistake made by him into a big deal. Stop causing a scene, Deku. You're just being distracting. Now he undoubtedly disappointed her beyond belief for being such a stupid useless burden of a bastard child. Izuku was ripped from the downward mental spiral because Inko had placed the laptop back on the table and wrapped Izuku up in a big teary hug. Oh Izuku. My brilliant baby, you're such an amazing young man. She proclaimed, giant Midoriya family tears falling from her face, which greatly confused Izuku. Izuku shifted himself to better comfort his mother and was going to get the box of tissues when he saw the screen, revealing the fact that according to his test results he should be starting college, and the revelation left him gaping. Then he was crying too. It took about an hour for both Midoriyas to calm down and talk over what to do next. After a lot of discussion, Izuku agreed he'd start the college portion if he could test out of the high school part. Izuku did the high school test while Inko busied herself with taking care of the dishes and putting away the leftovers. Izuku squeaked once he completed the test and covered his flustered face when a second congratulations message popped up. Inko happily clicked confirm on the option to get a diploma, then hugged her son again. They had a third long conversation about what to do, though this one was about what courses Izuku should take. They had spent a long time discussing the pros and cons of each course, how many he should take, and what his major would be. Izuku still desperately wanted to be a hero, but he knew and understood that realistically he couldn't. His previous research of hero schools showed that most had a strict ban on quirkless students altogether, even U.A. had a quirkless ban for their hero course, which was better than most, seeing as some schools had a full ban on quirkless if they had multiple courses. Instead, he chose to major in a subject that he loved, quirk studies and analysis. Izuku hadn't even known that was an area of study. Izuku knew there were quirk counselors and analysts, but he had figured they were just a part of a subsection of psychiatrists, doctors, or scientists, not a whole other branch of study. By the end of the night, Izuku chose 6 courses in all to round out his knowledge and was nervously excited to get started. Oh, I have to call Mitsu-chan, Inko said, getting her phone out to inform her dear friend. Izuku's stomach flipped once his mom said that, and while he didn't want to hide things from Auntie Mitsu-chan or Uncle Masan, he was sure they'd both be just as happy about the news, but if they knew, then Kachan might find out too. And that thought made a small part of him scared. Izuku knew Kachan wouldn't attack him for being ahead of him grade-wise or in education. Even when they were in school, the teachers had to prompt him to attack Izuku for that, but that didn't stop him from being scared that Kachan would hate him even more for getting so far ahead of him. Izuku was contemplating whether or not to remove a few courses when his mom got him to his feet. It was slightly past his bedtime and he was too tired and emotionally exhausted from the evening's events to protest as his mom shooed him away to his room. Izuku went to sleep that night feeling conflicted about whether he should be more excited or nervous about starting college at 12 years old. Chapter 7. And the Aftermath. Masaru was not looking forward to the day he was about to have or the conversion he was going to have with his son. He took a deep breath and sipped his cup of tea, then he checked the time. Mitsuki had left about an hour ago to get Inko some things for staying at the hospital, which left him and Katsuki alone in the apartment. The place had been bathed in an eerie silence the moment Mitsuki had left, but he couldn't find it in him to ask her to come back just yet. His wife needed time to come to terms with their son's actions or she might snap again. Whilst he too was affected by the knowledge of their son's behavior, he was more level-headed and had taken charge of getting everything needed in order. He had already called the school to inform them that Katsuki wouldn't be attending school for a while due to a personal matter and they would likely need to discuss his current enrollment. He also informed their employees that they wouldn't be able to come into work due to a family emergency. Masaru had made those calls once his wife had left and Katsuki hadn't come back out of his room since Mitsuki snapped, so he stood in the kitchen by himself contemplating. The discovery of their son's violent tendencies was definitely an emotional moment. When Mitsuki had told him what Katsuki had done, he wished he could say he was more surprised than he was. He wanted to say that learning his son was a bully had completely blindsided him. But he couldn't. Katsuki had unfortunately inherited his mother's condition, and though they had taken the steps they thought were necessary to prevent him from hurting others, it was clear that it wasn't enough. Masaru could recall the multiple talks he had with Katsuki over the years of picking his battles, or that there was no shame in removing himself from a room if he was uncomfortable. They had also helped to teach him some exercises that would help him relax, talk to his teachers about his condition so they could remove him from a situation before it could turn violent, or call them if Katsuki had a fit. While Mitsuki took medication to help balance her out the anger, they had previously refrained from putting their son on meds given his young age and the apparent lack of need since there weren't as many incidents since Katsuki turned 6. Masaru scowled and cursed himself for being so naive and for trusting the boy's teachers far too much. The lack of calls should have been a dead giveaway, as even his wife still had problems controlling her anger even with regular therapy and medication. They had also considered putting Katsuki in therapy years ago, but it was a fruitless search for a child psychologist trained in explosive disorder, capable of handling the possibly explosive fits or tantrums, and wouldn't be a quirkist that would put dangerous ideas in his head. However, their efforts might have been for nothing given what Inko told his wife. They had a lot of decisions to make when it came to punishing Katsuki for his actions and how to prevent him from getting even worse. The first step they had unanimously agreed on was that Katsuki couldn't continue going to Aldera, and while home or online schooling was an option, the lack of social interaction and perceived confinement to the house would likely drive him crazy. Masaru had tasked himself with making a list of schools in the district with the intent of vetting them thoroughly before making any suggestions to his wife. The next decision was to get Katsuki in therapy, both with the three of them as a family and on his own, regardless of how difficult it would be. Mitsuki was the one who insisted on finding family therapy, not that he was going to argue given how clearly they were disconnected from Katsuki in his life. She was also going to be taking charge on that end since she had more experience with getting a good therapist. Masaru could understand his wife being unaware given she didn't come home as often as the model and face of the business, but he came home almost daily and had no such excuses for being so out of touch with their son's life. Whether or not they were going to get Katsuki on medication like Mitsuki was something they were going to consult a doctor and psychologist with before making any concrete decisions, given that might just make things worse. He ducked his head, feeling ashamed and disappointed with his inability to help his son or protect his godson. He had made a lot of assumptions when it came to their relationship in recent years. Izuku, while confident and happy as a toddler, had become much shyer, nervous, and introverted after his quirklessness was discovered. He had attributed that to the bullying they were told about from pre-K to second grade, as well as him getting Inko's personality given how often children take after their parents and she was the main role model Izuku had. Hisashi abandoning them had also no doubt played a part in the way Izuku closed himself off. When Izuku stopped coming around after school and stopped coming over regularly to see Katsuki or for sleepovers on the weekends, he put it up to them simply drifting apart in the last 5 years. While Inko and Mitsuki were very close and had the same personalities as their sons, that didn't guarantee they would want to be friends, and he certainly wasn't going to force the two to be friends if they didn't want to be. He also hadn't blamed Izuku for distancing himself if Katsuki and Mitsuki's anger issues had scared him and he wasn't comfortable being around it after being bullied. Both had their moments, and Katsuki's quirk only made his fits all the more dangerous when they did happen. There were a lot more things that floated up to his mind when he thought of the boy's behavior that made too much sense with the idea that Katsuki bullied Izuku. But the few times he had questioned Izuku about how things were or when something weird happened, the boy always had at least 3 solid explanations for it. Such as the one time he saw familiar scorch marks on Izuku elementary school uniform was dismissed with a story of a boy that was being mean to him and how Katsuki was a bit too eager in defending him. Izuku had often told them that Katsuki was the one to defend him from the bullies whenever it was brought up. Masaru wasn't sure if the greenette lied because he feared Katsuki's wrath or out of misplaced loyalty to his son. Another more concerning question was when the boy was asking Mitsuki about makeup. He claimed it was because he saw a commercial with a hero advertising it, but now he was sure the boy was looking for tips on how to hide the bruises. It was suspiciously around the same time that Izuku claimed the teachers were starting to crack down on the bullying. Katsuki calling Izuku a Deku of all things was concerning, but he just assumed it was just another thing he picked on from his mother after he misread Izuku's name. There were worse things he could have chosen to call Izuku than useless, given Mitsuki's potty mouth. Masaru knew Izuku was a smart and loving young man, and he didn't know which part of that crushed him more. That Izuku either didn't trust them to help with the bullying out of fear they wouldn't believe him, or that he felt the need to hide his pain from them to protect his son's dreams and their family. It, unfortunately, could go either way given how bad the bullying must have gotten. After finishing his search, he checked the time and saw that it was around breakfast time. Masaru made something quick for himself and Katsuki before going to Katsuki's room and hesitantly knocking on the door. Katsuki? Are you awake? He asked, feeling a bit uneasy as he stood outside the door. Then there was a soft grunt back. I made breakfast. Katsuki, do you want to eat at the table? Masaru questioned. He could hear footsteps on the other side of the door before the click of the lock. The door opened, and Katsuki shuffled after him much demure than earlier. Masaru sat down across from Katsuki, and the lack of arrogant babble from Katsuki made the atmosphere around them stifling. Looking down at the rice bowl with an egg he couldn't bring himself to really eat at the moment and decided to get this over with. Katsuki, we need to talk. Masaru stiffly told his son. Katsuki put down his chopsticks. Is this about the clusterfuck from last night? The blonde questioned and Masaru sighed. Yes. Katsuki, I need to ask you some questions and I need you to be completely honest with me. Masaru sternly informed the boy. Katsuki normally would have scoffed back at him, but he was apparently still shaken from last night. Yeah, whatever, old man, just be quick about it. I need to get ready for school. He grumbled. Masaru took a deep breath. Katsuki, I've already called in and told them you won't be coming today. Katsuki blinked, seemingly taken aback. Eh? He grunted, confused. I'll explain later, but first I need to know what happened when you left school yesterday. Masaru questioned. The blonde rolled his eyes and put his head on one of his hands. TCH, I just did what I always did, old man. I walked home partway with that shitty Deku and some dumbasses, then did homework and training in my room until the hag said it was dinner. Katsuki answered, brushing the whole thing off. Masaru felt his jaw clench but didn't call the boy out just yet. So you didn't follow Izuku and attack him with your quirk? He asked, choosing to cut straight to the point. What? Katsuki said, staring at him. Katsuki, did you use your quirk on Izuku? He reiterated, giving his son a firm look. Yeah? He told him, giving him an odd look, squirming slightly. Masaru wasn't sure how to take Katsuki's relaxed confession. So you have been bullying Izuku? Masaru inquired, and Katsuki immediately balked. Fuck no. I've just been trying to teach that dumbass a lesson. Katsuki argued, and Masaru's eyebrows furrowed. Katsuki, do you know what bullying is? He asked, and he could see the anger rise in his son. Of course I do, old man. He yelled, likely insulted by the implication. So you've never hit Izuku, on purpose intending to hurt him? Masaru questioned, and his son paused. Well. Yeah, but that shit's different. The blonde replied, crossing his arms and leaning back into his chair, averting his eyes with something akin to meekness from the boy. Why? Masaru prodded, and Katsuki scoffed, then told him, "'Cause that shitty Deku is still going on about that hero fantasy crap, as if that dumbass could become a hero just by fucking studying." Masaru felt a moment of annoyance at the reason he gave. So you have the right to hurt Izuku because he dreams of being a hero? He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, but Katsuki again looked personally insulted. What? Fuck no. I'm kicking his ass because he ain't doing crap but being an obsessive creep while saying he going to be a hero. Do you know how frustrating hearing that shitty Deku constantly going on and on about being a hero, when he hasn't seriously trained a fucking day in his life is? If he keeps this crap up, he's going to get his dumbass killed. Katsuki shouted, pushing himself away from the table, and began pacing, though the volume and energy behind it was closer to stomping. It ain't like I haven't tried to help that fuckwit. I tried to train with him when we were younger, but that dumbass would just sit there like a crappy possum and fucking take it. Even after all these years, that shitty Deku hasn't done crap to actually train himself physically. Katsuki ranted, occasion pops coming from his palms. Even rescue heroes need to know how to throw a punch, but does that useless Deku do anything to learn to fight? Fuck no. The only thing he does is obsess over those stalker notebooks he has and brag about going to be the first quirkless hero once those Hero Safety Commission fuckheads stop being quirkist assholes. Katsuki snarled, years of pent-up frustration finally given voice. I mean, Deku's whole clusterfuck of a plan is to throw himself either in between the victim and their attacker or at the attacker while flailing around like a starfish. After all these years and heroes, he stalks and supposedly learns from, and he doesn't know shit about strategy. Katsuki shouted. The only reason he had not tried to rip his hair out was because of how volatile he was at the moment. He hasn't done any training and he thinks he's going to be a fucking hero. He's just going to get his ass killed throwing himself around like he has some kind of death wish. Katsuki growled, letting off one big explosion from his right hand. That wasn't what Masaru was expecting to hear, and it left him puzzled for a few moments, but he was starting to connect some dots that were forming a much better picture than what he and Mitsuki previously feared he could have said. Katsuki, did you tell Izuku you wanted to train together? He inquired, a small bloom of bittersweet hope forming in his chest. That dumbass and I promised to be partners, of course. We were supposed to train together, that's fucking obvious shit. And since shitty Deku's quirkless, we'd have to train even harder and start sooner, but every time we did, that idiot turned into a big fat crybaby. Katsuki told him with an attitude like what he was saying was painfully obvious. And constantly insulting him? Masaru asked, and Katsuki huffed. When that idiot wouldn't fight me, I tried to piss him off. I always want to punch someone when they're being annoying. Katsuki brushed off. I see. And using your quirk on Izuku, that was for what? Training? Masaru pressed, and Katsuki scowled. It's like I said, that shitty Deku wasn't doing anything but stupid crap. I tried everything at that point to get that fucker to do real training, and I figured if I used my quirk, the shock of it might at least get him to do something other than fucking lay there. Katsuki spat, arms crossed again. Masaru sighed, feeling a headache building and rubbing his forehead. Katsuki, did you ever say anything to Izuku about you still wanting to be hero partners or training together in the last couple of years to him directly? He inquired, and Katsuki gave him an odd look. No, but that shit was fucking obvious. We talked about this crap since we were tiny ass brats, about being heroes together, and I've been trying to train together with him for years, but he always tried to fucking ditch me, the fucking bastard. The blonde responded, waving a hand. Katsuki, did it ever occur to you that Izuku didn't know you were trying to train with him, and that he might have thought you were being serious when you were trying to piss him off? Masaru suggested, feeling slightly dumbfounded that something so innocent as a misunderstanding could be the reason Katsuki was bullying Izuku. He could see the gears turning in his son's head and stare at him confused. The fuck? What the fuck are you trying to say? Of course, Deku knows we were fucking training, and there's no way he has his head stuck so far up his own ass to think I was being serious when I was talking shit. I was just spewing complete and utter bullshit. Katsuki argued, his rage lowered to a simmer by his confusion. A part of Masaru was heartbroken by his son's ignorance of what he was doing. Katsuki. He sighed under his breath, then raised his head. Katsuki, when was the last time you and Izuku did anything together? Or talked about anything? Have you done anything to make him think you were still friends? Masaru asked gently, knowing that the realization might be just as shocking to his son. Katsuki's eyes narrowed and his mouth opened, then closed as his eyes widened slightly. And no, but of course the shithead knows we're friends. We might not shoot the shit like Auntie and the hag, or see each other outside of school, but we. Sure, we didn't do shit since we were 8, but I mean we. Katsuki's protest trailed off as uncertainty began to creep in. What did the rest of your classmates do to Izuku? Masaru inquired. Inko hadn't gone into details with Mitsuki, but Masaru could hazard a guess considering Izuku's hospital stay. TCH, most of them are two-faced bastards. In school, they give Deku shit, but most of them don't give a damn once school ends and just fuck off. A few of them are dicks, but I'd kick their ass before they start shit with him. A couple of those extras have been leeches trying to get in on our training the last couple years. Katsuki explained, annoyance coming back as he thought of them. Katsuki, if one of your classmates did what you have been doing, would you think they were bullying Izuku or helping him? Masaru proposed, seeing his son's main hang-up was his perspective of the situation. Katsuki's nose scrunched up and his chest puffed up with instantaneous rage, and he was about to spit another rant full of vitriol, then paused, his mind racing and his face became less angry and more uncertain as he thought of it. I'm not a bully. Someone would have stopped me if I was going too far with training. All of our teachers saw that shit. The blonde responded, looking distinctly uncomfortable at the implications of Masaru's questions. Masaru felt himself scowl at the mention of Aldera. Have you ever used your quirk in classes? He pressed. Yeah? Katsuki answered a bit more hesitant. Have you ever been punished for it? Masaru asked back. Katsuki was a smart young man, and he has been old enough to know the dangers of his quirk for years. Katsuki didn't respond right away. No. He muttered. Have you seen any of your teachers stop anyone from picking on Izuku since we learned he was quirkless? Masaru inquired, and Katsuki's silence spoke volumes. There is no way you or Auntie would let me do anything to really hurt him. The blonde countered, the uncertainty beginning to combine with fear as reality started to sink in. Masaru averted his eyes and his hands tightened on his cup. Do you know what your mom and I were talking about last night? He asked, finally looking back at his son after a moment of tense silence. Katsuki apparently couldn't find his voice as he shook his head. Your mother had just come home from visiting Izuku and Inko at the hospital. Masaru told him, and Katsuki paled. What? The blonde said, the horror in his voice making it meek. Until yesterday Izuku has been hiding everything you've done to him. None of us knew about your training. Considering everything you've done to Izuku, don't you think if we knew that Inko would have told you not to be so rough with him by now? Masaru explained to him. One could have seen the last threads of hope being crushed in Katsuki's eyes, and he started to tremble. I'm not. I wasn't. He said, voice cracking before he fled to his room. Masaru didn't follow him, and he heard Katsuki slam his door closed seconds later. His gaze fell to the now cold food as he sat in the kitchen alone with his thoughts again, as he tried to comprehend what to tell Mitsuki and Inko. Chapter 8. Stepping out of the comfort zone. The following morning, the Midoriyas got a FaceTime from Uncle Masan and Auntie Mitsuchan from Tokyo to congratulate Izuku for starting college. The couple asked some questions about the sudden jump in education, and he was praised for his accomplishments before they had to get back to work. It took a couple of months for him to balance his old schedule's timetable with his new college courses, and was surprised that he now had a large chunk of free time. He had tried to fill the time like he used to with board games and his hero analysis, but he burned through all those rather quickly. Izuku did enjoy the extra time for his analysis, but felt that he was being lazy seeing his mom working so hard to support both of them, so he took the initiative to look into how he could legally go about getting a job. He was expecting that he would only be able to do small things like household chores such as mowing the lawn, maybe babysitting, or walking dogs, so imagine Izuku's surprise to discover that he, a quirkless 12-year-old, was, legally speaking, seen as nearly an adult. Apparently, according to Japanese law, since Izuku was 10, he was legally allowed to live on his own, buy, rent, own and sell property, vehicles, get a license to drive, sail, fly, adopt children if he meets the legal requirements to do so, get married to anyone of legal age as according to the Japanese laws of marriage, work a full-time job of any profession he is trained in if he fit the legal requirements. The sheer number of liberties he had was a complete shock to Izuku because of the few times he had been allowed anything in or out of school, and his school counselors certainly hadn't said a word of this fact to Izuku. Though after thinking about it thoroughly, it made some sense to him, given quirkless suicide rates reached 87% once they turned 10 years old, which only got higher the older they got, and the remaining 13% that didn't kill themselves had a 58.4% chance of dying from hate crimes or domestic abuse. Being able to leave at 10 had probably been what helped drop the number to the low rate it was now, but it also probably got passed mainly so people had the right to kick their quirkless children out and people could get money out of them. Well, regardless of the reasons for such an astonishing law, he was going to take full advantage of them. That night, Izuku gathered up every scrap of courage he had to ask his mom for permission to get a part-time job. It was a long talk over the pros or cons of getting a job, and eventually, Inko agreed so long as it was a light-duty job such as a librarian or something similar. Izuku happily jumped straight into the job search, having spent the first couple of weeks scouring both online and in papers without much luck. If an employer could look past his age, they would reject him for his lack of qualifications, or some would bluntly tell him they didn't want a genless null in or on their property. It was discouraging but expected, so Izuku tried not to get that hung up about them. It wasn't until he went to pick up a special order package from another prefecture for the Bakugos that Izuku found a stroke of luck. He had popped into a small store to get some things for his mom on the way back and noticed a community corkboard. Izuku took a moment to check up the board for any small jobs that he might be able to take when his eyes locked onto a small worn sticky note. Tutor wanted 13,750 yen per session XXXX4X. Izuku beamed at the note and quickly added the number down in his phone, feeling a bit more hopeful this time, though he tried not to let himself get his hopes too high. He finished up the shopping, and when he got home, he helped his mom put stuff away. Then when she was running the package over to Auntie Mitsuchan, Izuku went to his room and called up the number. Hello? A youngish girl's voice answered and Izuku swallowed, his nerves getting the best of him. Hello. I'm calling about the tutor note. Is the job still available? He softly questioned. Yeah. The girl replied, and Izuku couldn't help feeling a bit excited that he might find a job. Great. Can you tell me what kind of tutoring you were interested in? Izuku asked with pen and paper already in hand, just some middle school math and science. She answered, and Izuku felt a grin growing on his face. He could help with that. I can do that. I'm available every afternoon except on Sundays. Izuku offered. Sundays were days just for him and Mom, and he wasn't willing to part with them, for now. Okay, I need to talk to Ani-chan. Hold on please. The girl requested, and Izuku chirped back his agreement. He could hear some muttering on the other end and waited with bated breath for an answer. He says we can meet Tuesday to Friday, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. The girl eventually told him. That'll work just fine, Izuku assured. He spent the next few minutes confirming things about the sessions, like that the tutoring was going to be for the girl's brother, whether they would meet up at their house or another place, how long they wanted him to help, and how many sessions a week. By the end of the call, Izuku was utterly thrilled about finding a job and happily told his mom once she was back, babbling about it while he got together everything he needed for his first day of work tomorrow. Chapter 9. Venturing into Dangerous Waters. The afternoon of the next day saw Izuku sitting on a bullet train car heading to the South Side district, picking at his nails. Izuku's enthusiasm had been dashed shortly after he researched the address the girl gave him and learned it was located in the infamous South Side. Izuku had heard hundreds of horror stories of the district and people who lived there. Izuku naturally became reasonably nervous about going to the red light district, having found multiple reports and headlines confirming those stories and few heroes that were supposed to patrol the district. However, this was the only job Izuku had found, so he chose to suck it up and be a big boy. So he avoided telling his mom where he was heading other than he'd have to take the bullet train and armed with a taser, another gift from Auntie Mitsuchan. He anxiously rode on to his destination. He had to get off at a station about 3 blocks from the district since there wasn't one inside it. Walking to the address from their left, Izuku weary but curious as he passed crumbling or straight-up destroyed buildings. He kept his guard up regardless of if he could see people or not, but Izuku did see more people than he thought he would. Some of them were obviously the sketchy characters and gang members one would expect in a red light district. They eyed Izuku with the same amount of suspicion when they saw him. Izuku found walking through the South Side wasn't too different from walking the halls of Aldera, but he was much more coherent and conscious of the people watching him. He found that the address led to an apartment complex in a denser cluster of buildings, and it was in better condition than most. Izuku, after figuring out that the exact address would be on the 2nd floor, was very careful when he climbed the stairs with how loud they creaked. Finally, at the front door, Izuku double-checked the address matched and that he was on time before he hesitantly knocked when he saw there wasn't a doorbell. Then, faster than Izuku could process, the door was yanked open and a hand grabbed him by the neck, dragging him inside before he was slammed against a wall. Izuku was temporarily dazed from the impact and sudden assault, but quickly came back to himself, staring down a scaled snout to a pair of cold, piercing yellow slit pupil eyes glaring back at him. Who are you? A low, gravelly voice snarled with a heavy lisp. Izuku trembled under the man's gaze, all too familiar with this terrifying position, and his throat nearly locked up. I'm here to tutor Miyaki-san. He forced out through incooperative vocal cords, scaled fingers with claws tightening around his neck. Midoriya? The other hissed questioningly, not losing his harsh tone, and Izuku shakily nodded, not trusting his voice. The man kept Izuku pinned by the neck for another minute, glaring down at him harshly, then released him. Izuku softly gasped and his hands went to his throat. Looking up, Izuku saw a tall man with an obvious reptilian-based mutation still glaring down at him. Papa. Is he here? A familiar young voice called. Glancing down the entranceway, he spotted a little blonde girl with the same eyes as the man. When their eyes met, she smiled, revealing two pairs of fangs. Midoriya-kun. You're here. She cheered, running right up to him. Hello. Is Miyaki-san home? Izuku nervously asked, still shaken up and keenly aware the man was still watching him like a hawk. The little girl nodded rapidly. Ani-chan. Midoriya-kun's here. The girl exclaimed, dragging Izuku along with her by the arm. She had pulled him to a living room kitchenette room where a tall boy, maybe a little older than him, with the strongest reptilian mutation of the three, sat and briefly noted he had golden eyes rather than the pale yellow the other two had. Midoriya-san. He greeted with the same lisp the man had. Hi, you're Miyaki-san? Izuku asked, still very nervous with the man trailing behind, not needing to see the man to know he was glaring at him. The boy nodded and the girl dragged him to sit by Miyaki. Great. Did you want to start with math or science? Izuku inquired, trying to smile despite the man glaring holes into him. Science. The boy answered. Izuku brought out the books he borrowed from the library and placed them on the table. Miyaki-san wasn't very expressive due to his reptilian features, but Izuku could tell how frustrated he was just trying to understand his homework. Getting an idea, he pulled out one of his notebooks to illustrate the experiments or things he was trying to explain to Miyaki-san, and he was happy to learn that Miyaki-san worked better with visual aid. So, he continued to draw everything out for him to follow along, and the little girl seemed to be just as interested in what they were studying. Izuku was happy to explain simple differences between different chemicals, how they change when they stabilized or turned reactive by adding different ingredients like in baking. After they finished his science homework, they took a break as the little girl insisted they all have a snack. Miyaki-san glanced at the man. I apologize for father's behavior, we live in a dangerous neighborhood. The boy told him, but Izuku nervously waved it off. It's perfectly fine, I totally understand. He responded, and he wasn't just saying that for Miyaki-san's sake, it's not the worst thing that's happened to me. Izuku meekly joked. Miyaki-san blinked, then nodded before turning to the girl and giving her a baby carrot. The math homework went over much easier, and they finished earlier than Izuku expected, so Izuku helped him get a little ahead with his science. Once they reached the end of the session, the man gave Izuku the promised 13,750 yen in notes and coins. Izuku bowed deeply to the man and promised to be back tomorrow before heading home. Izuku thankfully didn't face any problems on the way home and happily showed his mom the money he made before telling her bits and pieces of the session, leaving out the parts of being manhandled by the oldest Miyaki or the state of their apartment. Izuku made the trip to the Miyaki's apartment all 4 days, and thankfully the last time Miyaki Sr. stopped pinning him to the wall, which Izuku was thankful for since he didn't want to start hiding bruises from his mom again. He learned the two Miyaki kids' names were Masao and Kaori as well. Izuku adapted quickly and grew used to walking to the old Musutafu but kept his guard up. After a month, Izuku was becoming comfortable in the Miyaki's home, and Miyaki Sr. no longer grabbed Izuku when he arrived. He had brought little Kaori some blueberries once since she mentioned she liked them. He was walking down the stairs and was about to turn around the corner to start the walk home when a hand grabbed him by the arm. Izuku squeaked as he was yanked back and found himself face to face with a woman without eyes. Izuku would have normally screamed bloody murder if he hadn't been paralyzed with fear upon seeing the woman's empty and heavily scarred eye sockets. Wait. No, he was paralyzed and couldn't move an inch. Izuku would have been sent into a downward spiral of all the horrible god-awful things that were going to happen to him if the woman hadn't spoken up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have grabbed you like that. Her voice was hoarse and cracked. She let go of his arm. That's my quirk, I can paralyze people I touch. It should wear off in a minute or so. She explained, moving away, shifting from one foot to the other. Now that she moved away, Izuku could see more of her. Not that it made him less scared, since she did look like she walked out of a horror movie. My son. He knows Miyaki and says you're the one who's been helping him with his homework. The woman said. She began to pat her side until she found her coat pocket and searched inside it for something. Now that he had the chance to calm down, Izuku noted the woman didn't look half as scary as she did homeless. He could see multiple things about her clothes that indicated she was trying to make the most of what she had left of the torn coat and dress. He was brought out of his thoughts when she pulled out some paper yen notes. My son, Kiku needs help with his math. This should be enough, right? She asked. Izuku felt sensation return to him by a strong, almost painful tingling all over. Izuku hands shakily took the money and saw it was about 5,150 yen. Why yeah. What days do you want me to come by? Izuku inquired and the woman smiled, which made him cringe a bit as her lips cracked. Saturdays around 5 p.m. We live in apartment 24, thank you. She answered before she left Izuku to process this encounter. Chapter 10. A Heart to Heart. Kiku was an excellent student once he met him the next day, and Izuku enjoyed teaching him first-year elementary school math. Tanaka-san wasn't the only one to approach him in the following month, as the families in the building were talking about him. So he started just having a study group at that point and took various amounts of money from each of them. During that month, he became closer with said families after seeing them near daily, to the point that no one living in the complex didn't know him. Izuku also quickly became painfully aware of the living situation in the south side. In the 2 months working in the district, he had only seen 1 or 2 pro heroes patrolling the very edge of the red light district. He hadn't seen one inside the district despite seeing various crimes, usually drugs, and hearing multiple gunshots. There had been times when Izuku had been forced to leave early due to gang fights outside the apartment complex. There were also other times where he was late because he had to avoid sketchy things or people on the way. Izuku couldn't help feeling guilty as he stared at his hero merchandise and knowing that the kids he worked with sometimes had to play the eat, shower, safe bed, pick two game, like how the Miyakis were struggling to pay for Masao-san's schooling, or how Kiku-kun would often search for spare change on the street every day when he was walking home. One day when he was packing up his things after spending 4 hours teaching his little group to write kanji as well as some science and math, Izuku felt a hand tug on his pants, and when he turned, he saw little Kaori, Kiku-kun, and about 5 other kids their age had gathered around him behind him. Izuku chuckled and pat Kaori's head. Do you need something, guys? He asked, turning around to face the group. Kiku shuffled a bit before he offered a paper to him. Izuku took it thinking it was just some work Kiku-kun wanted him to check over. But once he saw what was on the paper, he didn't see the math problems he and Kiku-kun were supposed to go over. Instead, he found a drawing with 3 figures in crayon, one of Kiku-kun, Tanaka-san, and himself if the names were anything to go by. Confused, Izuku turned to the boy and was met with Kaori proudly showing her own drawing of her family and himself with a big blue hill and dots. Aki-chan's sensei said people can draw something for someone important as a thank you, so we all got together to make you these. Look, this all of us on top of a pile of blueberries. She told him, pointing at the 4 stick figures. Izuku's mouth fell open out of shock and turned to the other 5, seeing them each holding a different drawing. Izuku had been rendered speechless as he accepted each paper, only half listening as the kids each took turns explaining their drawing. Aki had just finished telling him about the drawings she made of her older brother and him at the beach with her when Izuku broke. He carefully put the drawings in a folder, then proceeded to hug all 7 of the toddlers, thanking them for the most amazing presents he's ever gotten. On the train home, Izuku held the folder close to his chest, and once he was home, he walked to his room going through the drawings again, still blown away by his gift. Once inside, his eyes fell upon his expensive hero merchandise, and that heartwarming feeling was thrown into conflict with the overwhelming guilt as the multiple faces of All Might stared back at him. Looking down at Kiku-kun's drawing, Izuku's eyes furrowed before he stared at his room with a newfound determination. He set aside a box and carefully went over his entire catalog, choosing only 1 piece from each hero, or if it was special to him, then put it in the box. Everything else was photographed and put on auction online. He was sure the act alone probably broke a promise or 2 he made to himself when he was younger. He assured himself, though, that All Might would be supportive of his choice to sell the man's merchandise to help people in poverty. Izuku didn't have many rare items, but he did keep his stuff in good condition, so he made a good mint from most of it, roughly 2,886,860 yen per 5 items, which was way more than he expected to get. Once he had the money, he went to different stores to get medical supplies, rubbing alcohol, bandages, etc., and non-perishable food, then got waterproof boxes to make care packages. He'd make about 5 every day, then would be on his way to the south side. The people at the apartment complex were definitely surprised but happily accepted his gifts. He'd give 3 to his students and the other 2 to whoever wanted them. The way the people in the district almost warmed up to him was quite noticeable. More people would go up to him asking for help for themselves, friends, or family with varying subjects: math, science, spelling, etc. He was happy to help but quickly realized that he couldn't keep going as he was without burning himself out, and went out of his way to scope out the district. Izuku was slightly terrified as he wandered the district looking for an unclaimed territory to hold his study group. Upon an hour after he started, Izuku found the remains of a community center. It had been blown up judging from the scorch marks and mostly crumbled building. Most of the inner structure was gone, leaving just a big room with most of the roof still intact. He searched the remains of the building for any gang markers or signs of anything else that could be dangerous. Finding nothing, he decided this place was going to be the best he was going to find and marked where he was on his phone. That Friday he brought a bunch of cleaning supplies and cleaned as best he could during the hours he'd normally be doing his college courses, and that Saturday he tried to get the community center to be relatively alright to be inside for long periods. Then he told all the people he was teaching where it was and when he'd be teaching. The first week was shaky as there were some fights between the older people. He spent the second week setting up the rules of his study group and closely examining the dynamics of the people that showed up. Izuku was a lot more observant since he had healed from the TBI, and he put it to work to find the problems of his group so he could help them better. Once Izuku had everything figured out, he took some money to draft a laminated schedule. He tacked it up so everyone knew what he was teaching and when. The schedule also had what days certain gangs should come since they were the biggest infighters. While he didn't approve of gang activities, he had become very aware of how hard some people had it and couldn't bring himself to ban anyone affiliated with a gang. If they wanted to learn how to write basic kanji, he would teach them so long as they didn't try anything stupid while he was tutoring. Things smoothed out after that and he was able to keep everyone to be respectful. Izuku would collect the money up front before the sessions and that money went straight back into the community. He'd stop at stores just outside the district to get more things for the people there. Instead of buying individual things and making the care packages at home, Izuku would buy clothes, toiletries, food, school supplies, and medical supplies a few blocks away, then bring them to the district, leaving it all in the community center for anyone who needed it. The residents of the South Side gratitude became clear as they stopped eyeing him like an outsider. Not everyone was welcoming him warmly, but he started getting nods or waves from a good portion of them. Others were so taken by him they would give him food. He tried to refuse at first but eventually gave in and would just give the food either to the people that came to his sessions or a shelter. Having become a routine part of his life, he began to easily recognize the people he passed by on his walk, and they probably knew him in turn. It was probably after one of his students helped him carry the fluffy winter coats he bought that he realized that he no longer felt any fear as he walked the roads of the old Musutafu. That he had gotten so used to the roads and the people there that he knew them so well, he knew them like the back of his hand. With that knowledge, he found it hard to be afraid of this place anymore, even when the occasional firefight happened. The previously held fear of the district having long since faded, even if he was still well aware how dangerous these roads were. The confidence he had when he walked past the local gangs was utterly surprising. The fact he could walk the streets of one of the most dangerous parts of Japan without a hint of fear was slightly empowering after spending so long forcefully ducking his head. The gangs that lived in the red light district held a certain amount of respect for him, not because he was powerful or anything like that, but a lot of them had members or family whom he taught, that had given him some wiggle room to wander the south side as he saw fit so long as he kept his nose in his books. Reaching the 3rd month since he started going to the south side, he had to come clean about where he was going to his mom. He hadn't lied about where he went or what he was doing, but Izuku had been purposely vague about certain details, and with how big this had grown, he didn't want to hide it anymore. So, one Sunday he sat his mom down to fully explain. Inko, the loving but anxious mother she was, lost it when he told her he had been regularly going to the south side for his job. He had to subsequently calm her down before they could continue talking. It's really not that bad there, mom. Izuku tried to reassure her, sweat dropping. Inko blew her nose. Izuku, it's a red light district on the other side of Japan, she exclaimed. Why yeah, I know. Izuku admitted, rubbing his neck and averting his eyes. There are all sorts of gangs there. His mom cried, why yeah. He confirmed, letting his head hang. And you've been going there all this time without telling me. Inko choked out through her sobbing. Izuku got her more tissues. He swallowed the lump in his throat, waiting for her sobbing to die down before he continued. I'm sorry, but I knew if I told you, you'd make me stop. Izuku shamefully apologized, because the south side is dangerous. Inko told him, and Izuku nodded, as safe as he felt in the south side that didn't erase the danger of the area. I know. But after spending so long looking for any job, Miyaki-san was the only person that didn't see care I was. Izuku tried to explain, although his words died on his tongue just as quickly. No one in the south side cares I'm. He trailed off again, fiddling with his sleeve. Inko's sobbing died down as she tried to rein herself in. Mom. Please just let me tell you about them first, Izuku pleaded, but Inko didn't want to hear one more word of Izuku going to the south side. Inko had wanted to outright forbid him from stepping 1 foot outside Musutafu and wrap the boy in bubble wrap the second he told her he had been sneaking off to the south side. But as soon as he began explaining how he met the Miyaki siblings, Inko saw a spark of something she hadn't seen in Izuku for ages, so. Reluctantly, she continued to listen, watching as Izuku slowly came out of his shell with every word he spoke. A passion that had once been reserved for his dreams of being a hero freely flowed as he elaborated on every decision he made. Izuku showed her all the drawings he got from the younger kids and showed her pictures of them, excitedly explaining what he taught each of them with the barest hints of pride in himself. As Izuku told her more and more, Inko came to the conclusion of just what she was seeing and why it was so earth-shattering. Izuku was happy. Not the porcelain smiles that threatened to crack the moment he dropped his guard, but pure, genuine happiness. It was only after seeing him gush about his work in the South Side that she could see how utterly fake his act from before she found out about the bullying was in comparison. Inko could hardly remember a time when she last saw Izuku so alive. The twinkle in his eyes wasn't there even when he spoke of heroes or quirks. It was sparkling so bright she would have mistaken Izuku for the sun itself from how brightly he beamed. The only time she could ever recall Izuku being this passionate had been before he was declared quirkless. Before his dream of being a hero had been crushed by the harsh reality of the world. Her mind flashed back to her 5-year son practically begging her to support him, to tell him that even if his dreams weren't possible that he still had her support, and she remembered the only thing she could think of was blaming herself for being unable to give him a quirk so that he could a chance at his dreams. That when her son was vulnerable and needed help, she had let herself be crushed under the weight of her guilt, and how she failed to support him when he needed her most. People frequently brushed off hindsight, but she couldn't this time. Izuku was sitting in front of her with small blossoms of hope over his work, fragile hope held together by a string. She physically couldn't separate this moment from when he was 5. She had seen what happened the last time that hope was crushed, and she wasn't sure either of them would survive it a second time. So, despite knowing this was a horrible, awful, no good idea, she wasn't sure she could outright forbid him, so with trembling hands she took one of his. Are you being safe? She asked, interrupting his rambling. Izuku paused, blinking. Of course I am. He replied. Inko bit her lip, then said, does this make you happy? Izuku again paused before smiling shyly. Why yeah, I think I am. He answered, seemingly just as amazed by the fact as he said it. Inko stared at him for another minute before she came to a decision. Oh okay. She muttered, nearly regretting it. Izuku blinked, looking confused before it hit him what she meant. Izuku burst into tears of joy and hugged her, repeatedly thanking her over and over, practically clinging to her. She had already broken her son once before and she couldn't do it again. Even though what he was doing scared the living hell out of her, she would support him. No matter how much it hurt her,